Hello, please let me see your ticket stubs for the double-edged double bill, where you get 2 film and or media discussions for the price of 1. Which is nothing! Each week, Adam Thomas and Thomas Mariani will come to the table to randomly select the yin and yang of a double feature. One will have 2 good movies, the other 2 bad ones. Both will have to pick a number between 1 and 10 in order to seal their fates for each episode. Let the chaos begin. I am Thomas Macabriani.
I am Adam Tracheotomy Thomas.
And with us is the Horror Returns host himself, Laborious Lance Langford. Lance, how are you?
Oh, man, so excited, so excited.
Yes, he is, of course, our guest from the previous Zombies episode, but this time he is going to help us in the intro for our topic this week, which is children's horror. In honor of Goosebumps 2 is coming out, we decided, let's do what people might call the gateway horror movies for kids. Obviously, like, you know, movies that are, like, spooky, Halloween horror themed, but not necessarily too spooky to spook kids out. Like, because as we talked about this, Adam, it's an underrated subgenre of the horror genre.
Oh, 100%, man. I mean, there's quite a few out there that I still consider classics that, I mean, got me into the genre that still hold up. Like, especially one of my earliest memories of horror was the Monster Squad.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is that they're not coming out really that much anymore. I mean, you just got 2 this year, but that's really kind of it.
Yeah, you know, I will say I liked the recent Jack Black one, The House with the Clock in its Walls. I thought it was cute. But what about Lance? What was sort of a gateway horror movie for you?
I don't know, man. I think I just kind of sort of dove in. I actually probably, well, we talked about it on the last episode, Night of the Living Dead was a big one for me, but I don't know. I started doing more reading early, actually, and that kind of got me into watching some of the horror movies. Well, I was reading Stephen King at 10 and 11 years old. So, after that, I probably watched The Shining at age 12 and Carrie at age 12, and burn through all of those. So, early zombie movies, all the Vincent Price stuff, House of Wax, not the remake. Yeah. But the original. All that stuff, man.
I mean, I would say, like, the William Castle movies would be a good sort of older gateway horror movie thing. Say,
I think so.
Yeah, like the House on Haunted Hill, I think is a great one. That's a great spook house of a movie.
I will stand by, if you go back and listen to one of our really, really old episodes where we did Miss Peregrine's Home, and along with it we did Willy Wonka, and I still say that's a horror movie.
Well, it has the same structure as Dawn of the Dead, pretty much, in that they come into this area and get picked off one by one. It's very much structured that way.
Absolutely.
They just have the one line, just like, they're all back to their awful, terrible selves. It's like, oh, okay, they didn't die. Sure.
Yeah, dude, and sure. I mean, I know it's been mentioned before, but that fucking boat ride is the most terrifying, one of the most terrifying things ever.
Oh, fucking loved it, dude. I had nightmares for weeks after that.
Yeah, with the chicken getting decapitated, perfect children's entertainment. But let's get back to the point of this intro, which is to pick our movies. So, for those of you who might be here for the first time, each of us come to the table with 2 movies that the other doesn't know about, between me and Adam. One has 2 good movies. This week it's me. One has 2 bad ones. That would be Adam. Under the guise of children's horror. And usually we would pick a number between 1 and 10 from each other's picks, and we've each assigned both our movies 2 numbers, and whichever one gets closest to the other number, that is the movie we pick for both the good and the bad feature. But since Lance is here, Lance will be the one who will do the picking. So first, for my 2 good movies, Lance, number between 1 and 10.
I'm going to repeat the Beatles and say number 9, number 9, number 9.
Oh, it's Pontypool all over again. Well, right directly at number 9, Adam, it's funny you mention Monster Squad.
Yeah, buddy.
Shane Black.
Yes,
that's awesome.
Shane Black and Fred Dekker, yes. The 1987, essentially Goonies with the Universal monsters in it.
Absolutely.
Nice.
But then at number 5, I did have one from my childhood that I loved, The Witches, with Angelica Houston.
Oh, that's a great movie, too, man.
Okay.
Those are two good shows. I'm stoked about Monster Squad. And maybe I'm some sort of fucking psychic or something. I don't know.
Lance, another number between 1 and 10 for Adam's 2 bad choices.
Oh, God, I don't know where to go. I'll go right in the middle, number 5.
At number 3, I have the classic Jim Varney, Ernest Scared Stupid.
Oh, no!
That was one I remember growing up with, Adam. I'm very curious to revisit that.
That's cool. At number 7, I have The Haunted Mansion with Eddie Murphy.
Okay, we'll stick with Varney.
Yeah, Varney's a way better choice. I completely agree with that. But before we go, thank you, Lance, for being here. Of course, The Horror Returns, right? Everybody follow him over there, correct?
Yeah, of course. Thank you, man. I appreciate you guys inviting me.
Absolutely.
Yes. And we'll be right back, boils and ghouls, with our double feature right after this.
You know who to call when you have ghosts. But who do you call when you have monsters?
We're the Monster Squad.
They're young and inexperienced.
Naughty virgin.
They're a bit disorganized.
Get him in the north! Do it! Wolfman Squad nears.
The Monster Squad. Rated PG-13.
And we are back from our double feature, and we brought along a new guest with us. It's Mr. Kaycee Jarrard. Kaycee, how are you doing?
I am doing fine. I'm really glad you called me lovely, even though it's pretty much a lie.
Yes, it's a bold-faced lie. But, Kaycee, I brought you on here, giving you the list of topics, and you immediately were drawn to the idea of kids' horror. What drew you to that as a topic?
I really love horror made for kids. I think it's incredibly creative. You look at a lot of, young kid stuff, like series like Courage the Cowardly Dog, Scooby-Doo, or even stuff that is very schlocky, like Goosebumps, Are You Afraid of the Dark. You will find some really unique episodes and really weird ideas. A lot of kids' entertainment does not necessarily take its audience very seriously, but that isn't necessarily the case with kids' horror stuff. They are willing to go darker, and they're willing to treat the kids more seriously, and they're willing to have a real-world grasp for them. I'm thinking about something like, The Halloween Tree, which is a story where a kid dies of an appendix bursting, and it's about trying to save your dead friend. That's pretty cool.
I was really excited, honestly, that we got this particular double feature, mainly because I know also that your sort of gateway to horror in your own right was the Universal monsters, the Draculas, Frankensteins. Is that correct?
More or less, yeah. I started in the 30s and I kind of worked my way upwards, mostly by coincidence, but hey, it worked out. I was actually really excited when it drew Monster Squad because I'd never seen it before. It's like, oh, I'm really glad to see that. And here's another movie I also have to see.
We'll get to that movie in a bit. But let's start with Monster Squad, which came out in 1987, August 14th, 1987. A fan favorite of those in the horror genre, directed by Fred Decker, co-written by him and Shane Black. And this is one of Shane Black's earliest screenplays. It's interesting that this came out the same summer as Lethal Weapon, which really launched his career. And this one didn't really do much for it, because it wasn't very successful at the time it came out. For a $12 million budget, only made about $4 million. And Adam, when we ended up picking up the movies for this week, I know you were really excited about Monster Squad, because I believe this is a childhood favorite of yours.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. This was one of the ones that I just rented over and over and over from the local video store. I can still remember the way the old video, the case for it looked and everything.
Kaycee, as someone who watched it for the first time for this episode, what was your impression of Monster Squad?
It's fine.
Good night, everybody.
No, it's good. Perhaps it's very good. I can tell that I would have been the same way. I not only would have been a big fan of this movie, I would have been obsessive about it had I seen it when I was 6 or 7. But I straight up did not know this movie existed until I think I was 21 or something.
Yeah, admittingly, I actually saw this, interestingly enough. I was definitely outside of the age range to be obsessive over this movie. I saw this in high school, and I remember hearing a lot of people who were just outside my age range really loving Monster Squad. It was their Goonies. more so than even Goonies was to some people. And I'd seen Goonies as a kid, and I remember being not the hugest fan. Controversially, I know every 80s kid fucking loves Goonies. I think Goonies is kind of overrated. I think it's
Really?
I honestly, I think it's a mess of a fucking movie, and I don't like most of the kid characters. We'll get into that if we ever cover Goonies. I don't hate it, but I'm not the hugest fan of Goonies overall. But I really dug Monster Squad, even though, like I said, I was outside of the age range to like Monster Squad obsessively necessarily, like Kaycee's talking about. I was really infatuated with it. I think because my problem with, say, like Goonies is like it's Richard Donner's like more grounded sensibilities mixed with like a big over the top adventure movie, and I think that clashes constantly, versus this feels more consistent and a whole, I think, with like these version of kids who have a grounded base in reality of some sort, but are also very much movie kids at the same time. I think they strike a better balance here with that, and combining that with monsters I think just really works. Especially, we gotta say, these designs for these versions of the classic Universal monsters, though they can't be called Universal monsters because this was a Columbia release at the time. This redesign still is so great for all these characters. Like, what would you say is your favorite of these redesigns, Adam?
When I was younger, I really liked the Wolfman, but now it's definitely the Gill Man. I think the Gill Man is fantastic. The suit, the animatronic face, I think it's just done so well.
I know what you mean. The moment I looked at the Gill Man, I finally understood what it must have been like for the woman in Shape of Water.
Just really infatuated with them.
Oh, I wanted to know what that Gill... I can't talk about this on a kid-friendly podcast.
Fuck no, you can't. This is for every single kid out there.
You think the Gill Man's got a red rocket?
I think it's like that bit in Shape of Water where it's like hidden, but it'll come out.
The Gill Man's interesting, especially because this was like, until Shape of Water, like a solid 30-year gap between that design and then like that for any kind of Gill Man. Really, I can't think of another Gill Man in that space.
Yeah. Maybe
Sapien. Only other one I can think of.
Argue, yeah, probably.
I'm sure if you go down it, you'll find a Mystery Science Theater episode that has one besides Return of the Creature from the Black Lagoon. But they are surprisingly rare for such an icon.
And even then, like, the Return of the Creature, whatever the last one that they did was also in the 50s, so that's like another 30-year gap. It's like we just have 30-minute cycles with the Gill Man. It's a shame. But I can't wait for fucking 2045 when we get the new Gill Man movie. But, let's get back. I will say Gill Man's a really good choice, but I honestly think that my favorite, and I think it has a lot to do with the guy behind it, is definitely Frankenstein. I think it's a classy version of Frankenstein. All of them have like a somewhat classic base to them, but they have obviously the heightened special effects of the 80s. Stan Winston is obviously behind them, and I think Frankenstein has the best of sort of both worlds with it. And especially we got to talk about, I would say Tom Noonan as Frankenstein is a very underrated Frankenstein. I think he gets all of the like tragedy of that character, the sweetness, and also they combine that with just some of the sort of more 80s things that work for that character in here, like him saying bogus, him picking up on certain cultural bits. I'm so endeared to like the relationship between him and the younger sister, Ashley Bank, is, I think, the heart of the whole movie.
Really reminded me of Boris Karloff, but not in a way that felt like he was just imitating him. It was, this is going to be a weird comparison, it reminded me of Carl Urban's Dr. McCoy in Star Trek. It's like, you're your own thing, but you also know why the original worked so well.
Yeah, I get that. Tom Noonan is quite good in this. And, I heard he can be quite a pain to work with, but man, did he put it all out there for this. It's one of the best Karloff Frankenstein performances there has been, for sure. I mean, but then again, how many can you really think of? De Niro,
Clancy Brown, The Bride.
Clancy Brown?
No, it's the one with Sting as Dr. Frankenstein. And
I've never seen that.
I've never heard of this.
Yeah, it's one. I think it's Jennifer Beals as the bride. It was an 80s movie.
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Other than Karloff and Noonan, I mean, I throw Aaron Eckhart up there. But I mean, no, he's fantastic, dude. I mean, and you're right. Him and Phoebe's relationship is absolutely 100% the heart of the movie. And I mean, just how adorable was she in this too? Ashley Bank. She was one of the cutest little kids.
Don't
What
be
I-
shaking shit is
Yeah.
one of my favorite lines. It's a great example of like how to have these kids, you know, like they curse, they do say, you know, it feels more grounded. That's the stuff that feels the most grounded to me, is really how the kids sort of talk amongst each other. And I think especially even with her, it feels like something she's picking up. She doesn't really know what chicken shit is. She doesn't know it's really a curse word, but she wants to be one of the Monster Squad. She wants to be part of the club. And what I like is that, like, Fred Decker kind of explained this, that the movie is sort of like building up to them being the squad. They're a club before the climax of the movie, and by the climax they become actually the squad, because everybody gets their moment to really show themselves off and work together as a team. And I really agree with that. I think that's the most sort of structurally engaging thing about the movie, is I feel like we get a development from all those characters before we get to their, you know, big climactic battle. I think it really builds up to that quite well.
And there are a lot of characters in this movie. The only other movie of its type I can think of with more is Goonies, which, like you said, doesn't always balance them. This was pretty well balanced. And in addition to that, I bought why these people know each other. I bought how they correlated. What's his name? The kid who looks like Corey Feldman, but older.
Rudy?
Yeah, Rudy. I bought why he, even though he doesn't really fit in with this clique, is still kind of hanging out with them. I bought why they were letting the little kid who found the monster in his closets go along with them. The dynamics were pretty strong in a way I wasn't expecting.
It's a lot to do with, obviously, like the combination of Decker and Shane Black, which we should talk about. Fred Decker is somebody who came out of nowhere in the 80s and made a bunch of movies that nobody ever saw until it became like cult classic status, with like this and Night of the Creeps. Those were like really big ones. And then he made RoboCop 3, and his career completely went downhill. And he only did a few like episodes of Enterprise, and then about 2 decades later, recently teamed up with Shane Black again to write The Predator.
I was listening to another podcast where he was on it, Fred Decker, and the thing about it is, he was even saying on it, he never really wanted to be so much of a director, though. He's always loved writing. But he also said, you know, in hindsight, maybe I don't want to be a director anymore because of, he didn't name it by name, but he said, because I did the 3rd movie in a trilogy, he's like, it just ruined me. So, I mean, and with good reason. That you could tell there was just studio hands all over that movie. You can see a lot of Shane Black in this movie as well, just with the relationships between the characters and whatnot. It's kind of a bummer Fred Decker didn't get to do really more, because I think Night of the Creeps is one of the fantastic 80s cheese movie, and this is just a classic to me. So, I mean, I guess we could take away, at least we got these out of him.
I think that Shane Black's style really lent itself in a great way to this movie, because he knows when to subvert things, he knows when to make parody, and even when it's not like subverting tropes of the old Universal movies, there's just great one-off lines in there, like, how did the dog get up here anyway?
That's true. It feels like there's a real sort of like stream of consciousness kid logic going on with the movie. It definitely feels like the two of them came together. It's like, okay, what did we think of when we were kids and we watched these Universal monster movies? What were the discussions we had, and what do we want to see sort of come out of this? What's something that we would never see like any of these monsters do? Like, obviously, one of my favorites is the Wolfman exploding. I think is
that's totally cool.
And coming back together, that's just a great thing, especially because, like, well, I love, John Landis has this quote that makes a lot of sense, where it's just like, what are the rules for doing a vampire? There aren't any rules. It's fake. You can do whatever the fuck you want with a vampire because they're not real anyway. Like, I love that this movie kind of takes the spirit of that quote and just really runs with it. With just stuff like, oh, hey, can, Dracula turn into a bat and be like a giant bat monster mid-transformation? Sure, let's do that. Let's have, stuff like...
Dracula have a really good throwing arm and accurate with dynamite. Why not?
I love that too, especially because, like,
that's one of my favorite things about this whole movie.
Well, like, on a pure visual level, it's kind of badass, but then you really think about it, it's just like, he probably thought the kids were in the clubhouse.
Oh, Dracula he completely did.
Fully set on murdering children with dynamite.
Yeah, with dynamite. Well, the thing is, he's Dracula. Does he need it? No, not really. He just wants to make a statement.
He can't get into a clubhouse unless they invite him, so this was the next best thing.
That's true.
Yeah, I guess. You just wait. You know?
We're one draft away from he just gets a chainsaw and cuts down the tree, and that's how he gets them.
Or he's got one of those old school saws with no one on the other side, so it's real hard. I wanted to talk about Duncan Rieger real quick, though.
Yes.
As Dracula. I think he's a very, very underrated Dracula. I don't think a lot of people give him enough credit. I think he's completely forgotten that this Dracula existed other than the fans of this movie. I think he's a fantastic Dracula, dude. I don't care if he's kind of blonde or not. I think he's really, really good.
What I like about him is the fact that he feels like a natural leader versus, say, like in earlier versions of Dracula. Dracula's always sort of like a lone wolf, as it were, not really.
Right.
Like, because obviously whenever these monsters did team up, it was usually them fighting each other anyway. But this guy feels like he commands and takes action. He has this poise. He feels sort of like a good mix of like the poise of Bela Lugosi with also a ferociousness that a lot of Draculas don't usually have, especially when obviously near the climax when he does the whole thing with just like, you give it back, you bitch, and then just like a little girl who's like holding up. Which is,
and he's
so
a
great.
Big dude too.
Very tall. Yeah.
Like he's really tall. Like he's imposing, physically imposing, as well as just being real cool and cold, but can just go batshit crazy and chuck dynamite and just call little kids curse words. I mean, this is an edgy ass Dracula. This Dracula don't give a fuck about no rules.
That gets into my one significant gripe of the movie. The story is somewhat, I don't want to say juvenile because that sounds condescending, but it's definitely a story that can skew towards younger audiences, perhaps as young as like 5 or 6. And the cursing, even though you guys are loving it because it makes the kids sound so much like kids, I feel like it's alienating a bit of the younger audience to go towards like ages 9 or 10 at the least. And the curse, especially, there's more than its fair share of homophobic slurs in this. And
absolutely.
I get the explanation it was of the time, but I don't think the explanation is a justification.
Let me speak on that real quick, because you got to figure out, I was 5 when this movie came out. My parents had a problem with it, but then it wasn't as shocking. You got to figure, when this movie came out, the general cinema at the time, I mean, it was just chock full of nudity, ultra violence and gore and action. So this was actually really on the tame side compared to a lot of things. Now, I loaned this movie to my brother, who has a 10-year-old. I think he was 9 at the time. And they started watching, and he shut it off, mainly because of the homophobic stuff in it. And I know you say it's not a justification, but it is still a legitimate reason. The times were different then. People did say things, whether they're offensive or not, they did say them and get away with them. And, I mean, you were just allowed to take in more in that time as a child. And, I mean, allowed to do more things that you would never allow your children at the age you were then to do now. It's just that's how it was. There's things in the Goonies that really are quite offensive and things like that, but they're still there, and it doesn't change the movie. And I'm not saying you're saying that. I'm just trying to offer a counterpoint to it.
I do agree with what you're sort of talking about in terms of like it. I think it's important to like sort of say that like it is very much of its time, not just in terms of aesthetics, but also some of the stuff like that. I think it's more bothersome when you have something like my least favorite thing about the movie, which is the point where you do have the Rudy character literally just like exploit a teenage girl's nudes.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I think that's more offensive to me than necessarily the language.
Yeah,
no, I can agree with that too. But again, not to keep like, well, you guys don't understand. In my day, movies were free. You got to figure that. I mean, Porky's was out then, and Animal House, and all these other things. It was done for laughs. I mean, it was so macho machismo at the time. Nowadays, no way that shit can fly. And I agree with you 100%. It's offensive. That's horrible. But nobody thought of it like that then. So they got away with that shit. So it doesn't bother me maybe as much as it does you guys because I saw it then when I was that young. So the shock value wasn't there for me.
I think what especially bugs me about it is, if not for that, like I said, not only could you show this to a 5 or 6-year-old, this would be a great way to get them into old horror stuff. Because there's, obviously with kids, there is a bit of a hurdle of not necessarily want to get into something made more than a generation ago. If they got into this, they could get into Frankenstein, they could get into Dracula, they could get into The Mummy, and then you could get them into newer stuff until eventually, like by the time they're 10 or 12, you got them into Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I think this would be a very useful tool, if not for that. This is gonna sound like I'm such a censor or somebody from a concerned parents group. If there was a cut of this movie that was a little bit lighter on stuff like that, or cut out the stuff with Rudy and the nudes, or like when he's taking photos of the girl, then I would probably really love that, so I could show it to more kids.
Well, honestly, I wouldn't necessarily show it to really anyone younger than about age like 8 or 7 or so, just because I think that's a good.
Yeah, I agree.
I would say that's a good age where it's just like, okay, you can explain like certain stuff doesn't quite hold up, but at the same time they can. It's at an age where they could like more understand that. Then again, I'm not a fucking child psychologist. None of us are.
No, but also you can. It's easier to explain to an 8 or 10-year-old that the monsters aren't real than it would be a 5-year-old.
Right, yeah, there's that, and I think also at that age they can more understand some of even like the more mature concept stuff that I think does work for the movie. Like, I really, especially this watch, loved the whole relationship with the divorced parents going on in the background. That is such like a very grounded thing to have in the middle of this movie with like Andre Gower's parent Sean being in the middle of what seems like a very messy divorce.
Yeah, awful.
Yeah,
awful divorce.
Especially, I didn't even notice this until later, but like the scene with Dynamite, when you see Mary Ellen Trainor, also of Goonies, the mom from Goonies, she has bags that are being packed. She's about to leave her family.
Oh yeah, she's walking, dude.
Yeah, I know.
She's walking.
Like, I never noticed that.
Yeah, she was bailing. No, and you know, obviously when I was younger, I never picked up on any of that, but watching it now as an adult, you know, because I mean, I really want to get divorced too. So watching it, it's like, oh yeah, taking notes and stuff, you know. But no, it's
Heather is a friend of the show, a lovely woman. Don't let him say anything about this to you, Heather. You are a strong, independent woman.
Like Kaycee was even saying in the beginning, it grounds it. It makes it so much more real. That, you know, amidst all this chaos with these monsters and these kids shooting bows and arrows and dynamite and, you know, Horace, you know, Wolfman's got nards. There's this family fucking just crumbling behind it. And it just, they don't get into it too much, but it just grounds everything in reality to where you're like, oh my God, there's Dracula with dynamite. Holy shit, she's leaving. Like, it's just a really nice balance. And I do agree with what Kaycee said earlier too. You know, children's horror movies, they treat the children like, you know, genuine people, not stupid kids. And I think that's also why this movie works really, really well, especially because, you know, the kids are right and nobody's listening to them.
Not only are they right, but it puts them in real danger. Like, there isn't a feeling of, don't worry, they'll bounce back from that. No, Dracula has dynamite.
No, and I mean, there's also other stuff that, like, once again, kind of puts this movie firmly in the 80s, because you couldn't really have this in a modern context, but stuff like the German guy, who you just see the tattoo that indicates, like, he was in a concentration camp. It's like,
I love that.
It's all you need, too, because they don't need to dwell on it. It's just like, he's the guy who's just like, I know monsters, and then that is there, and it's just like, yeah, that's all you need. That's really fucked up.
If you're too young to really be exposed to what that means, then you're just going to gloss over it, and you'll think, oh, yeah, he was into Mary Shelley or something. And then but if you're old enough, you really carry the weight of that. It's a genius little bit of writing and directing.
Can I just say that Uncle Rico's fucking transformation scene is really well done?
Uncle Rico, that's right, he is Uncle Rico.
He's Uncle Rico, dude.
I completely forgot the Wolfman is Uncle Rico. Holy shit.
No, dude, his transformation's great, and I love when he's in the police station. He's trying to tell him to lock him up and shit. I thought they handled the Wolfman really well in this movie, too, where he is literally, as he's, you know, billed as a desperate man. Like, he does not want to be this. He does not want to do this. It is a genuine curse. I mean, because let's face it, if you got a Wolfman in a movie, your transformation scene better hold up. And I felt they did it pretty good. I mean, with the limited... Obviously, it's not the American Werewolf, transformation scene, but in the quick shots you get it, I thought it was done really well.
It's a bit more of like the howling with the bladders and everything.
Yeah, I mean, it looks painful.
Yes.
So, I mean,
that's the main thing. It has to look painful.
Yeah, I mean, for sure.
But you know what? Let's talk a bit more about some of the other kids, because we've mentioned, like, Rudy and a few others. But what do we think of our main group of kids here? What do we like them? Like, obviously, like Sean and Patrick and all of them. Do we think they're likable, engaging kid protagonists?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Sean got on my nerves when I was a kid the same way Sean Astin and Goonies did. I don't know how to explain it, where it's like, chill out, kid. You know what I mean? Like, just relax a little bit. If I can calm down. I don't know why, but for some reason, the main kid in both those movies just bothered me. Now, no, not so much. He's good. Him and his Patrick's, little back and forth that they constantly have between the two of them is really well done. They do feel like they're best friends. I really like Horace, obviously, even though he's the quintessential 80s fat kid in all the movies. But they give him that one cool part, hey, fat kid, my name is Horace, and cocks the shotgun. But of course, the fat kid's name is Horace. I mean, that's like the worst name. Yeah, I think all the kids work really well together, man. Even David's brother, not David's brother. What isn't it Patrick's brother?
Which one? Do you mean the kid who like sees
Kid
the
who
monster?
sees the mummy.
Yeah, I think. Yeah.
It's Eugene, I think, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. He's cute in it. I like the bit with him where he does see the mummy and his dad comes in, and he's standing in front of opens the closet and starts making faces, doesn't turn around to see if there is a goddamn mummy in there. I thought that was really well done. And all the kids did really good in this for the most part. And it's so funny that none of them from this movie went on to do anything, and like half of them in the Goonies are big stars.
That was what surprised me with this cast, because I kept going like, where do I know this kid from? Where do I know this kid from? Like when Rudy showed up, I didn't do the math in my head to see how old he would be. I thought it was Corey Feldman, like young teenage years, and I thought that the best friend was Sean Astin, and then I was like, oh no, never mind. I don't know any of these kids.
So you literally thought you were watching the Goonies. You were drunk.
You were watching Goonies, weren't you, Kaycee?
You were watching Goonies, you
Admit it,
motherfucker.
Kaycee.
Taught me to talk about when the fat kid did the truffle shuffle.
I really like What I Will, this.
I loved when Frankenstein said, Frankenstein love Phoebe.
My favorite monster in this movie was Slog.
Sloth. If you're going to talk about it, get it right. It's Sloth.
It gets worse. In my head, I was thinking, like, what was the name of the monster in the Goonies? What's his name? Fez? And I was like, oh.
Yes.
You were just watching that 70s show. This is chaos. It's all coming apart right in front of us.
And Wilbur Valderrama probably is a monster, let's be honest.
But to get back on track here, if we can, I really agree. I think the kid dynamic works really well. I think what you're talking about with Sean Astin, it annoys me a bit more, because at least like the Monster Squad, right, as a concept, as a club, they're going behind something, which is like to know these monsters and, in this case, eventually fight them, versus Goonies is like a bunch of these fucking annoying ass kids who are grouping together, trying to find quote unquote treasure, and he, at least, like, Andre Grauer has, like, a speech that at least makes more sense where there's, like, immediate danger, versus fucking down here, it's our time, is a moment I don't think holds up very well from Goonies at all.
No, yeah, I mean, and not to keep getting on the Goonies, but his weird, like, dialogue with One-Eyed Willie is really odd in that movie. But, with the corpse of One-Eyed Willie, it's really strange.
This isn't the Goonies episode. We'll do that at some point. There's a lot to discuss with that, but...
Yeah. Oh, boy. I remember, though, as a kid, even though we already talked to him, I'm thinking that Rudy was the coolest motherfucker alive. When I was a kid, when he pulls up with the bike and makes the other kid eat the candy bar. And then he's like, I forget the line, but I'm doing my goddamn self. And he starts shooting the vampire
excuse me, the line is, I'm part of the goddamn club, aren't I? That's a great line in the movie, too.
I can't believe I forgot that line. But yeah, he goes out there with his bow and arrow, and he's just taking down these vampire chicks. he's a badass, dude. He's kind of a badass. I mean, he's a pervert, but he is kind of he's a badass pervert. Not a lot of those.
No, I guess not. We can give him
Small
that.
demographic. Small demographic.
It's a very small Venn diagram. He's like the one in it. But Kaycee, was there anything else like from this first time gleaming that you wanted to mention that really stood out to you with Monster Squad?
About the designs, I felt bad that we didn't have a little small talk about the design for the Mummy, because it's such a good design. And that's it.
Well, no, yeah, I agree, because he looks genuinely like a shriveled up corpse. Like, it's one of the few mummies that actually do that, where he does genuinely look like just this isn't something that should be able to walk around and it's shambling. And the actual scene where they have him come apart is actually kind of genius. It's another example of, like I said, the sort of kid logic. Like, what if the mummy was behind a car and then got caught on something with some of his fucking wrappings and it just, like, unravels? I love that. I love also the fact that the movie has plenty of those sort of, like, nitpicky plot hole things you could pick apart about the logic of the movie. Like, why is the mummy in that kid's closet? But also, it doesn't matter, because it's just fun, and it just really moves along at such a clip that you don't really give a shit about asking those questions.
Yeah, and by the way, the mummy was the most 100% underutilized in this film. They could have done so much more with that character.
I don't know, because the Mummy is, like, definitely the weakest of sort of the Universal monsters to me. Just because, like, in any of the Universal monster movies, even, they just, like obviously the original Boris Karloff one isn't even really a horror movie so much as, like, a dark romantic fantasy movie. And the other ones later just kind of become the proto for, like, a zombie movie, essentially. He's not genuinely that intimidating. I think they used him perfectly fine, honestly.
I mean, yeah, probably. I guess I just probably wanted to see more of it because the design was so cool.
I would say that more with Gilman, honestly, just because Gilman shows up and it's a really cool design, and he doesn't really do that much until he, like, starts fighting cops and then eventually gets shot by Horace.
Oh, and snapping their necks, dude. Snapping their necks and cashing checks.
That is true. He fucking snaps their necks pretty hardcore.
Those two, and this is pretty much the same as, like, what you were saying with the Universal movies. There just isn't much character to them compared to, say, another one of my tiny little favorite bits is I like when Dracula says hello, old friend, to Frankenstein, and there's a sense of camaraderie between Dracula and Frankenstein. That's just such a great little tiny idea.
Yeah, and I also love the fact that they sort of do a lot with, like, once again, the sort of logic gaps also, just like, how come the Gill Man is in this pond in the middle of this, like, random town where it just so happens that everybody else shows up too? And it's like, who gives a fuck? It's just like, he managed to travel to this pond by waterways. Doesn't matter. It takes that kind of kid logic to a really fun degree with just these characters. And I do agree there is a sense of history, even with, like, how Frankenstein is sort of the beleaguered one of the group, and is sort of one that gets, shoved around by Dracula, which makes him kind of becoming more with the kids work so well. Because, like, that's the stuff that really still works for me. Like, the moment where he looks at the Frankenstein mask and he just kind of breaks down, like, scary, and he looks at himself. And I love all of that stuff. And then I still honestly kind of tear up when he goes inside of the fucking vortex. It's such a dumb idea of just, like, Frankenstein gets sucked into a portal. But I feel so genuinely invested when that happens.
Yeah, no, definitely, dude. Definitely.
Honestly, I wanted him to stay. I think that it would have been a really great little thing to have just Frankenstein be part of the Monster Squad. Like, in the same way Sloth, aka Slog, was in Goonies.
Sure. Fake Goonies girl with your Slog.
Hey, I'll have you know, Fez is my favorite monster of the Universal movies.
I prefer Revenge of the Fez versus The Fez. I think they got it better with My Revenge.
And Bride of the Fez. And to a lesser extent, Son of the Fez, but not to the same degree.
So let's get into our final thoughts then on Monster Squad. Adam, you start.
Alright. Monster Squad was my basic gateway into horror because I was terrified of scary movies when I was a kid. They scared the shit out of me. All of them, any one of them, doesn't matter. I didn't watch them until this one came. and I rented it, and I loved it immediately. And this movie did exactly what we were talking about earlier for me. Watched this one, went right back and watched all the Universal ones, and then just progressed and progressed and progressed. By the time I was 11, 12, I'm watching Freddy Krueger squish a girl that just got turned into a roach inside a giant roach trap. I mean, this movie opened my eyes to the horror genre and to a whole different style of movie making. And for that, it'll always, hold a special place for me. And I do think this still is a good gateway horror movie as long as you take the time to explain to your children that it did come out in a certain time and that things that might be said in this movie or done in this movie are not okay now. But I still think it's a great gateway movie.
Kaycee?
I mostly agree with that. I think that it should probably be viewed by kids a little bit older, and I wish that it was a little bit, it could skew a tad younger. Overall, it's still a very good movie. It's a very creative movie, and it's something that if you know the Universal stuff very well, you're going to appreciate a lot about it. And if you don't know it at all, there's still so much there that can entertain you. I wish I saw this when I was at the age where I would have obsessed over it, but as is, I still think it's a very good movie.
And as someone who saw it, like I said, when I was just sort of outside of the age range to be like, look either up to these kids or see them as peers, I still found it to be a lot of fun. I think it still is a great, as Adam mentioned, with caveats, a pretty solid introductory sort of 80s horror movie for sort of the just about to become tween crowd of sorts. And I think there's a lot of cool creative stuff. There's genuine emotion I have for some of the performances in here, particularly, like I said, Tom Noonan's Frankenstein's one of my favorites. Very underrated performance of that. Also, like you mentioned, a really good Dracula. It's a really good example of how to update sort of these classic characters while, not necessarily losing the spirit of why they worked. Some people might need to learn from that, like Universal themselves. Like we mentioned, it's a fun relic of its time that still has a lot of stuff that can resonate to a modern audience with certain caveats that are still there. And really good for the Halloween season. Also, shout out to my favorite bit that we didn't really mention about. The gag about the army being called on by the little kid is such an amazingly, ingeniously stupid gag that I find so awesome. Dear Army, please help. It's so great. But speaking of childish movies, let's get into Ernest Scared Stupid.
Do we have to?
Yes, we do.
Are you certain? There's not a caveat, there's not a loophole that we can just run through and not avoid this entirely?
Do you have MIAC? Then no, we can't. Let's get into Ernest Scared Stupid.
Monstrous trolls have sprung to life.
I sure hope you're from Keebler.
And now Ernest P. Worrell is springing into action. He'll try anything
I know Tai Chi Kung Fu, chow mein.
and everything
Your shoes untied.
to save the day.
It's showtime.
It's Ernest P. Worrell in a brand new movie, Ernest Scared Stupid.
How about a bumper sandwich, booger lips? Know what I mean?
Starts Friday, October 11th at a theater near you.
Yes, so Ernest Scared Stupid is one in a series of Ernest films that came out in the 80s to 90s that starred Jim Varney as, I think we can describe it accurately as lower rent redneck Pee-wee.
Yes,
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I thought a lot about Pee-wee's Big Adventure when I watched this.
I mean, in terms of definitely what it's trying to achieve, for sure.
Sure.
Ernest P. Worrell, for those of you who don't remember, was initially the star of several commercials, mainly out of like the Tennessee area. From advertising executive John Cherry created him, and Jim Varney was just a local actor in Tennessee who got this gig. It was a very profitable gig for him as a commercial slot. So Ernest became like sort of a national phenomenon in terms of, like, initially it was smaller Tennessee commercials that were local and then kind of spread all around. And then Disney decided, hey, this Ernest character could make a lot of cash for us, so let's distribute some movies, which involved Ernest Goes to Camp, and then Ernest Saves Christmas, and then Ernest Scared Stupid, which was the last of the ones that Disney produced before they went independent, all the way until around the late 90s with...
Saves Christmas was the second one?
Saves Christmas was the second one, yes.
God, I always get that mixed up. I always thought it's Ernest Goes to Jail.
No, Ernest Goes to
which
Jail.
Which I think was the fourth one.
It's the one right after this, yes.
Yeah, so the fourth one.
And where is Ernest Go Somewhere Cheap?
Oh, I guarantee that might be one of them. Wouldn't surprise me.
Well, I don't know. I mean, there's some of those later ones are basically that. It's Ernest Goes Somewhere Cheap Part 2, Africa.
Right.
There is actually an Ernest Goes to Africa, and it's
yes,
terrible.
There is.
It's awful.
I can imagine.
I imagine that movie has no uncomfortable racial stuff in it.
Not at all. Not at all.
Does he record You Can Call Me Al while in Africa?
I wish. Yes, this is the third Ernest movie, and one that a lot of people sort of gravitate towards, like this and Saves Christmas, are sort of the ones that people who have nostalgic feelings for Ernest gravitate toward. And I think the tragedy of Ernest is really that Jim Varney's a very talented actor, kind of stuck in a box. Because he's brimming with energy and talent and a lot of excitement. I think he's a very underrated actor of his time, very funny when he is able to be. There are points in this movie where I would say he is, but it's definitely sort of like a box that he constantly tries to like maneuver with. And I think more than not achieves like at least some funny moments in this movie.
I agree. I really liked Ernest Goes to Camp when I was a kid. In fact, I still think there's some funny stuff to Ernest Goes to Camp because it wasn't so... I mean, it was over the top, but he only played Ernest. He didn't play 5 different characters in it. It was just Ernest. And that was during the time, all those kids in camp movies were coming out. But, fuck. Like, oh my God. I really do like Jim Varney. I think his voice acting was fantastic. I think when he'd show up in cameo roles and a couple things, he was really funny. But, man, were these movies bad. As bad as Jim Varney is in this, fucking Eartha Kitt. Oh, my God, man.
I found Eartha Kitt kind of fun.
Yeah, likewise.
But I always remember Eartha Kitt, she's got that stigma with me because that's not Catwoman. You know what I mean? Because when I was a kid, I used to watch the reruns of the original Batman show, and I never liked her Catwoman. So
I'm about to show an age gap here. My first thought when I heard her voice was, is that Madame Zeroni?
Absolutely it is. And dude, to me, that's my favorite Eartha Kitt role.
Yeah, this movie and to a lesser degree Holes, but especially this, made me realize that we really misused Eartha Kitt, and she deserves so much better from us as a society. We should probably, if we ever invent time travel, don't worry about stopping Hitler. Let's give Eartha Kitt a better career.
No, we really misuse Jim Varney.
That too.
Why not both?
Well, I guess if we got a time machine, I guess we can do whatever the fuck we want.
That's a good point.
But no, Jim Varney was just so underutilized and so misused, and he could have been, honestly, I think he could have been not necessarily as high the echelon as, say, like a Bill Murray, but right underneath him.
Well, he's a very committed actor, especially because he's actually Shakespearean trained. Like, there is footage of him performing Shakespeare, and he's actually quite good at it. He just has a bit of a Kentucky twang to him.
Right.
I really want to hear, because I know, Kaycee, this was your first exposure to Ernest, correct?
Yep. I found myself thinking at a point, I could be watching Troll 1 right now. Imagine how low the bar has to be wishing you were watching Troll 1.
Not even Troll 2, but Troll 1.
Yeah, which, hot take, I do like Troll 1, don't at me.
Is Troll 1 with, like, weird, naked Julia Louis-Dreyfus out of nowhere?
And Sonny Bono becomes a weird plant monster, yes.
And
he's fucking insane.
It's my 7th favorite Harry Potter movie. Thank you very much.
That's right, the kid's called Harry Potter.
It's the best movie where Harry Potter fights a troll. But either way.
Take. But anyway, Kaycee, first exposure to Ernest.
First exposure to Ernest, and honestly, when the credits started to roll, and it's all those homages to old B movies, but still in their own style, I was kind of into it. And Ernest was reacting. It's like, okay, he's a little over the top, but not bad. There was a tiny little bit where I thought, am I going to be the contrarian and think that this is better than Monster Squad? And then the movie started. And then it was just Jim Varney giving his A game, but still overdoing it. And I found Ernest to be insufferable. The script wasn't about him trying to make a kid laugh. Because on those stuff, it's like, okay, you're overdoing it a little, but the in-universe kids are having a good time. I'm okay with this. When he's just being silly for the sake of being silly without an audience around, I just rolled my eyes and waited for the scene to be over. The closest analogy I can think of is imagine watching Pee-wee's Big Adventure, but you don't like Pee-wee. Because there's still a lot of stuff you might dig, but fuck, you're going to hate the main thing.
Man, I don't know about that I can agree with that, because even without Pee-wee, at least Pee-wee's Big Adventure had a bunch of fun side characters and the weird Tim Burton-esque colors and sets. This has nothing.
No, see, that's where I definitely diverge, where I will say I think the movie honestly works for me the best when it is sort of Eartha Kitt and Jim Varney having fun with the limited amount of work they're given. I think they do a lot with it. I think especially the scenes where they're together. Like, there's the whole scene where Eartha Kitt talks about, like, the prophecy or whatever the fuck it is, and she talks about, like, the heart of a child. A child! I kind of love bits like that. It is more just, I agree, I think the side characters and a lot more of the stuff with, like, John Cherry's direction. John Cherry directed all these Ernest movies. I think that's where it really falls more for me. Because these side characters are completely underwhelming. Even the kids are just, like, barely entities at all. And there's the
annoying.
And there's the two guys who appear in a bunch of Ernest movies where it's the guys who run the hardware shop here, the fat guy and the super skinny guy. Mm-hmm. They're in a bunch of Ernest movies, and they're always like the least funny thing about any of them, and they're weird comedic relief to the comedy, which is like a hat in a hat, and it never works anytime they fucking show up in those movies. And like the parent characters, the only other solace I kind of found was the Chiodo brothers did the effects work, and I think the troll effects are at least like fun, even like especially the main one, the sort of practical actual like animatronic head. I think is a cool effect for a super low fucking budget movie like this is. It's just at least something to kind of gravitate toward when it's not Jim Varney or Eartha Kitt actually getting a chance to do what they can with it.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. That troll was legit scary when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Like, for real, that troll creeped me the hell out, man. Just with his big, shitty nose, and when he started growing all the appendages out of him and everything. I mean, he creeped me out. Because it is still a pretty well done costume, especially for the time, and I would imagine the low budget. But fuck, that's like picking a peanut out of a big pile of shit. I mean, there's just this fucking movie. This was one that I remember seeing as even a youngin' and going, what?
It's why I would say I think the best Ernest movie that kind of does the better balance of just like actually decent side characters, the best use of Jim Varney, all this other stuff, is Saves Christmas.
I can agree with that.
Yeah, I think Saves Christmas, it actually I think still holds up as like a minor Christmas classic, quote unquote. I use that with the heaviest quotation marks. More like it's a fun Christmas special if it's like on the 25 days of Christmas or whatever.
Okay, I'll give you that.
Does. It's one that I wouldn't necessarily turn the channel from if it was on TV. It's a fun Christmas movie for what it is, and I think it has the better sort of balance of all these characters for me personally. But Kaycee had no basis for that, and Kaycee, I'm sure, was just completely miserable this entire time.
I wasn't miserable the whole time. This movie is better than I thought it was in that I thought it would be atrocious, and it was simply bad. Faint praise. Right around the time I was thinking I could be seeing Troll 1 right now, I was thinking, how the fuck are there still 20 minutes left of this movie?
It's super overstays its welcome. It would have really worked better as sort of like an hour-long special. I think it would have been perfectly fine as an hour-long special, but it's like around the time of like right after there's this whole joke of Ernest can't seem to understand the idea that the weakness, despite how many obvious things there are about it, is milk. He goes for, what was it, Bulgarian miak.
Yeah, I mean, come on.
I mean, I at least found the commitment to that incredibly stupid joke entertaining. But
yeah, the fact that he's able to find miak in the middle of the night somewhere in Tennessee. Props to you, Ernest.
Well, so
this
that's
movie's all about how you're dumb. You're able to do that. I don't think I could do that.
Well, that's kind of like the most endearing thing about the Ernest character is he's very committed and very durable about very stupid things. I think that's honestly, I think I liked it definitely more than both of you guys. Which it is a movie I grew up with. It isn't one I haven't seen in a while, and I do agree it is a bad movie. But I think it's honestly completely harmless. I think we've seen such worse stuff for the show by comparison.
Oh, I mean, 100%. I mean, like, yeah, dude. Like, this is like an Oscar winner connects next to, you know, that fucking Belushi movie.
Yep. I think it does help also that in doing research for the show, I went down a rabbit hole of the attempts John Cherry has had to continue Ernest after Jim Varney's death, and more of a righteous anger against John Cherry. Like, I showed Kaycee one of these. They did a bunch of, like, animated commercials with Ernest in them, voiced by somebody else, and it feels like somebody spitting on their friend's grave. It's genuinely some of the worst fucking bullshit I've ever seen. It's like imagine Son of the Pink Panther, but you did a series of short segments and put them on television for it. It's
oh no,
it's so bad.
Oh God, I didn't even know about that. Oof.
Whatever charm is there, it's all out of Varney, and none of it all comes from anything else out of the movie. It feels just like he's holding it up by himself, especially when he does the different characters. We haven't talked about all the different characters that show up as Ernest, including one thing where he has the Mongolian makeup on.
Yeah.
And it's weird where it's just like, is this racist or just stupid? I can't tell.
A little bit of column A, a little bit of column B, I think.
I think a bit of both, yeah. But yeah, did any of those characters endear you, Kaycee? Were you just completely confused when that happened?
I was confused. I was wondering if it was an Ernest bit that I just wasn't in the know on. I found none of them funny, except kind of the lumberjack. He was talking about he's a lumberjack and he's never gotten any work in his country. I found that a little bit funny, and then everything else I hated. That was the moment I started getting pissed off. No, because before that, all the stuff that Ernest is doing, with the exception of the dump truck bit, is he's being silly in front of kids, and you can go like, oh, it's there to make them laugh. Or like, okay, he's building a treehouse. It's a silly treehouse, but it's kind of cool. If you were a kid, you would be totally on board with this. And then that was the moment. It's like, okay, this is bad, and it's not funny, and is it in universe? Is it out of universe?
The exact opposite of Monster Squad, where it's all these logic gaps, but the movie isn't entertaining enough to justify them at all.
Oh, this fucking movie.
Yeah, it's a movie.
I guess that clearly shows that we're running out of steam on Ernest Scared Stupid.
To your credit, like you said, it's harmless. This movie, despite how I said it was pissing me off, it didn't make me angry overall. It doesn't deserve Jim Varney, but it's not filled with rage like, you know, a Freeberg and Seltzer movie is.
Well, I guess keep going a bit more. I guess the final thoughts, yeah.
I do not like this movie. It doesn't make me mad, but I do not like it. I like it more than Ernest gets into taxidermy, but less than Ernest sees a second shooter on the grassy knoll.
Underrated Ernest movies, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Back to the left, you know what I mean?
They pitched that to Disney, and they're like, I think we're going to stop after Scared Stupid, guys. I don't know if this works. No one appreciated the genius of John Cherry's conspiracy theory-laden Ernest movies. But Adam, yourself?
Well, personally, my favorite is Ernest and the Bay of Pigs. But, no, this isn't a good movie, man. I kids would like this movie. I think, honestly, I do think this would be a good gateway movie for a lot of kids because of Jim Varney, because how, you know, goofy and crazy he is. But really, when you walk away, other than Jim Varney and you guys say Eartha Kitt, there's nothing in this movie, man. The kids are so bad and unrelatable. You don't give a shit about these kids. To think what could have been with Jim Varney. And yet, this is, you know, one of the shining examples of what we did get. It's just bad. It's just pure bad. You know what? No, this is just shit. It's pure shit.
I'm glad at least more people acknowledge his work as Slinky Dog. I think that's one more people would recognize and a way better use of him.
Yeah,
yes.
Godly Bob Alley. But yeah, I mean, I think I'm the lone sort of defender to a certain extent of Ernest Scared Stupid. I don't want to be the guy to die on this hill, and I'm not quite dying. I'm getting a small bruise on this one. In as much as I think it's fine. I think it's completely harmless. I think there's some cool effects work, like we mentioned with the Chiodo Brothers stuff. I think Eartha Kitt and Jim Varney are having fun, and sometimes that fun is infectious, sometimes it isn't, especially when he does the characters. I think that's more grating than anything else. But yeah, all the stuff around them, they're definitely, those three elements are not deserved for what was very much like a very bland, straight-to-video quality production, and a lot of the kid performances. Why, like I said, if you want a decent Ernest movie, go see Ernest Saves Christmas. That's the good one, I'd say.
Ernest Goes to Camp. Ernest Goes to Camp.
That one isn't terrible either. I mean, don't just stop after Ernest Saves Christmas. You're fine.
Yes, I agree.
Stop after
that. Dog, Mr. Ernest Goes to Washington.
People have certain inalienable rights. You know what I mean?
Ernest and the 11 Angry Men.
And Jim Varney is all 11 of the angry mother. Okay.
This is out of control.
It's completely out of control. So let's segue into our feedback section. We asked all of you out there, what are your favorite kid horror movies? And we have a few people responding. Mike Hatfield said Monster Squad. Show for you. Hunter Ellen said Hocus Pocus is a kick-ass classic. If you had Disney Channel, there's Halloween Town, and of course, The Nightmare Before Christmas, and Elvira, and all the Addams Family movies, and the Scooby-Doo movies, lol. I also used to really like the live-action Casper. Halloween is lit. Yeah,
sure.
Yeah, some of those, especially the Addams Family movies, I think, deserve more.
I'll give Hocus Pocus.
Yeah.
But no, I agree with the Addams Family movies. In fact, I never even thought of those. That would be a good one. I like those movies.
The bit with Wednesday Addams and the Thanksgiving play is one of the best.
It's Happy Turkey Day. Eat me!
Especially when I realized the other girl involved in that is Harmony from Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
Yes, it is. Yep. Don Chambos says, this is not a film, but the series Are You Afraid of the Dark was good. I loved Ernest Scared Stupid a whole lot. Well, Dan, sorry.
I'm glad you got entertainment.
I never got into Are You Afraid of the Dark so much, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I remember it, but it never really got to me. But I'd also like to throw in there something I didn't think of. I mean, it's media-ish, but, dude, I mean, scary stories to tell in the dark.
Yeah.
That's a great gateway.
I never even heard of that.
The books? The book series?
Full disclosure, I'm illiterate, but no, I've never heard of that.
Oh, dude, those fucking scared the shit out of me when I was a kid, too. Those are like Goosebumps amped up.
Yeah, I think they really work, especially the illustrations are also phenomenal in those. I remember that was an example where I read those after I read Goosebumps, because Goosebumps was very much like a gateway horror book series for me, and then I graduated to Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, and it did genuinely terrify the shit out of me, because Goosebumps is just whatever. It's just oh, it's kind of spooky, and then Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark will fuck you up.
There's a monster in your cornfield trying to rip your face off.
Yep.
Like, Jesus.
I don't even have a cornfield and I'm scared.
But I will say, with Are You Afraid of the Dark, I remember it was one of those series where I remember being very terrified by it as a little kid. There were certain ones. There's one episode where a kid goes into a swimming pool and there's a monster in there. And I remember it was one of those where it was post having seen Jaws. I'm like, well, at least in a swimming pool, I can't get attacked by something. And then that happened, and I was terrified. But then,
oh, Jesus.
Yeah. But then I went back to it when I remember I was thinking about 13, 14 or so, and I'm like, oh, this is fucking dumb. It's not a series that holds up very well to scrutiny. Not as much as, say, a Tales from the Dark Side or Tales from the Crypt. I think those are also good for, if you're near, tween, near teenage. Those are good ones for sort of...
Yeah, I could see Tales from the Crypt for sure, definitely.
Yeah. Oliver Sloan says Monster Squad and Mad Monster Party, which... yeah, we didn't talk about Mad Monster Party, but that's that's a fun one. That's the Rankin Bass Halloween film, actually theatrically released film, not a special. It's got Boris Karloff as the Dr. Frankenstein, and a bunch of fun plays and all the other different Universal monster types.
Little puppets and stuff. Yeah, that's a fun one.
Sure, if you're having a Halloween party, that's a great one to have on in the background.
Oh, yeah, that would be. Good call on that. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah.
And also, Oliver had this to say from our previous episode about zombies. Pontypool is so much better than expected. Starts a bit slow, but definitely keeps you connected. I especially wanted to bring this up because, Kaycee, I remember we talked about this off mic. You aren't a fan of Pontypool, are you?
Oh, fuck, I'm gonna have to defend this? No.
Fucking A, right you are.
It's not awful or anything. I might have oversold it when I said I don't like it. I'm more nothing it than anything else. I go like, okay, that's fine. I barely remember it. It's only been a year since I've seen it, and like I was listening to the episode you guys did just before we started recording, and I was going like, oh yeah, that is how they transmitted the virus. Yeah, I forgot all about that.
I can't be mad at you for that. I'll give you that.
Yeah, it does not stick with me at all, except for that stinger, and that stinger isn't a particularly good stinger. It's just so weird that sticks in my mind.
Yeah. Go listen to our Pontypool episode to show just how wrong Kaycee is.
Yes! You are probably correct, and I am probably wrong, but I will stand by this.
All right, our next feedback from Brian Kane says, The Twilight Zone is great kid-friendly horror. It was terrific at setting up situations that had horrifying implications, usually due to a character's own immorality or arrogance. I didn't even think about that till he submitted that, and that's actually very accurate. That's very true.
Yeah. Like, I'm not sure it was designed to be kid-friendly horror, but between the standards of what you were allowed to show on television in the 50s and where we are as a society now, yeah, I would show Kid Twilight Zone. Some of them, at least. I think To Serve Man would be too scary.
Perhaps. But, I mean, I remember as a kid, like, I watched a lot of those Twilight Zone marathons. Like, my dad got me on that. And after, get through that hurdle when you're 5 of, like, why is everything not in color? Then I actually still was genuinely just shocked by so many of those reveals. Particularly, I still remember vividly watching the Eye of the Beholder one as a kid. Ooh. And having my mind fucking blown out of my face. It was... that was a principal moment for me in terms of like how great a twist can be at a very young age. Would you agree with all this, Adam?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I remember the, there's something on the wing scared the shit out of me when I was a kid, man.
The part where Shatner pulls open the window blind.
Yeah, and it's pressed against it. Yeah, that scared the shit out of me. Twilight Zone, that's actually a really good call. I never thought of that either.
Also, I wanted to give a shout out. He added this to our last episode, too, in reference to Diary of the Dead. I hope you added music in order to try and scare us.
Oh, you just had to go there, did you?
Oh, Diary of the Dead. And then Stephen D. at WaitingFTH on Twitter says, when I was a kid, it was The Thing from Another World, Corman's Little Shop of Horrors, and the old Doctor Who, and the great book of movie monsters that got me into horror. I remember the posters for the Elephant Man and Halloween keeping me out of video stores for years. And I remember, of course, we're sort of like the last vestiges of that age of being scared by the horror section of the video store. Like, I still remember, the one for me was the Jack Frost holographic cover. The one that actually turns into Terrifying Snowman. Terrifying. I mean, that's another great example where I was so scared to watch it. And then as a teenager, I watched Jack Frost. I'm like, oh, this is just fucking terrible.
You watch it, you go, Michael Keaton's okay, I guess, but I don't like anything else.
No, not that Jack Frost.
That one's pretty terrifying, too, though. That's pretty bad. Horrific.
Snow Dad's better than No Dad.
The one that got me for some reason was the awful Rumpelstiltskin movie.
Oh, right. The horror
cover creeped me the fuck out for some reason. That and the Robert Englund Phantom of the Opera creeped me out too. The cover because of the gore on the face and the makeup or whatever. It got me.
Don't you just miss the Shyster movie of video store era of just like, oh man, this cover's so great, and then you watch the movie and you're incredibly disappointed. I miss that.
I mean, you don't have that anymore with streaming because you could just shut it off. Where if you rented it, you paid that $3. You're gonna watch that fucking movie. Like, even if it's terrible, you're watching it.
And then also, he submitted this on Twitter, but it was right after we recorded our episode about zombies, where he says his favorite zombie movies, which are, favorite zombie movies are Romero's first trilogy, the Dawn of the Dead remake, Shaun of the Dead, Plague of Zombies, and the Blind Dead series. We'll happily watch pretty much anything from the 70s, though. Least favorites are anything with Day of the Dead in the title that wasn't made in 1985.
Yeah, he's 100% correct.
We definitely can talk about that.
Yeah, because
Kaycee...
there's 3 of them. You know that.
Yep, there are.
There's Day of the Dead 2, Contagium.
Right.
Which was horrible. There's Day of the Dead, and then Day of the Dead, I think it's Bloodlines, isn't it?
Right, it's the modern one. And they're all from, like, the same production company, too, that just got the rights to that name and just used the fuck out of it. You know, I didn't talk about this last time, but honestly, the only Romero movie I would like to see remade is Land of the Dead. Like, that's the one where it's got the cool ideas and it didn't quite get it right. Like, that's the perfect one to remake.
Yeah, I think Survival of the Dead, if remade with a bigger budget, can be good. Yeah. I think that's got a really good, strong core idea there.
For sure. What about Kaycee? Are there any zombie movies that are favorites of yours?
Can I say the first 2 episodes of Walking Dead?
Absolutely, you can.
Because that was the first thing that came to mind. Like, the pilot of The Walking Dead is just a great little zombie movie in its own right.
No, yeah.
And beyond that, Last Temptation of Christ, obvious one.
Right.
And I'm almost tempted to put Hellraiser in there, even though it doesn't really count. But if it did, I would definitely count that as a zombie movie, or one of my favorites.
Yeah, Hellraiser's awesome, but I don't think it's a zombie movie.
It has an undead person in it, but I don't know. Then again,
that undead person is decaying flesh.
But he's coming back to life.
Well, that's true. He's more of a reverse zombie, actually, when you think about it. So he's a Izos, I guess. Is that how you would say it? I don't know if I pronounced it correctly.
Emos?
Emos. He's an
emos. He's an emo. I hate these emo.
He's emo. He's up there listening to Coheed.
Okay. We gotta end this fucking episode. So, thanks to Chris Oliver for the music used in our show. Listen to more of his music at chrisoliver.bandcamp.com. Thanks to Emily Scarda for her art. She accepts commissions at fiverr.com/eescarda. And of course, we want to thank Kaycee, our guest. Kaycee, you have anything to plug?
My Twitter at thecacer, THE_KACER. And my other Twitter, Ernest Movies Ranked, where I rank all the Ernest movies, such as Ernest Gets Into Radiohead, or Simon and Ernest and Garfunkel, or Ernest Commits Insurance Fraud, Ernest Shoots an Unarmed Black Teen.
Oh my god.
The really dark one. I think that's when the series kind of lost its way. I think for sure. This Twitter was evidently inspired by us assigning Kaycee Ernest Scared Stupid. I think it's the best achievement we've ever had. And then, of course, we also are on Twitter at DEDBpod, and also on Facebook. That's our Facebook page as well. You can find us there, and that's where we ask the questions about what's your favorite blanks before we record our episodes. So you can definitely contribute yours there if you so wish, and also by email at doubleedgedoublebill@gmail.com. We also have individual Twitter accounts. I'm at NotTheWho'sTommy, and Adam does nothing at what Twitter handle?
MalekithFan6969.
Yep. It's mostly there as like a museum piece at this point.
Yeah.
It's preserved in time. And of course, subscribe to us on iTunes, rate and review us to give the show more visibility. Do that, please, so we just get more visibility and more people will listen. It's a great content like this that you just listen to.
And by the way, the questions always come out on Mondays.
Yes.
So get in on that on Mondays and answer. And we typically will share them on our individual accounts as well.
Yes.
So the more feedback, the better. Yes,
of course. And on that note, we've got to go back into our club, guys, because we're part of the goddamn club, aren't we? Right?
You know what I mean?
Good night, everybody.
Yeah, Thomas, real quick, off mic or off record. I'm looking at his IMDb right now because I was literally trying to see some of the titles. According to this, Ernest Goes to Jail was before Ernest Scared Stupid.
Oh. Okay, I mean...
So it goes Ernest Goes to Camp, Saves Christmas, Goes to Jail, and then Scared Stupid. Okay. Which is weird. I'm just letting you know. I think you're right, because obviously you got those facts from somewhere, so I don't know.
I don't know.
Maybe Goes to Jail.
I really don't give a shit. I'll cut that out. I don't give a shit.
Fair enough.